The search team found her notebook 300 feet from the crater rim. The pages were open to an entry dated the morning of her disappearance, and the handwriting was different from her usual precise script. The letters were shaky, uneven, written by a hand that seemed to be losing fine motor control. The content made no sense to the investigators who read it. The first line said they communicate through the heat. The second line said I can hear them now. The third line said the opening is at the north vent and I have to go through. The fourth line, barely legible, said I understand why they chose me. The woman who wrote those words was a volcanologist with 17 years of field experience. She had published more than 60 peer-reviewed papers on volcanic gas emissions. She had developed instruments used by observatories around the world. She understood the dangers of volcanic environments better than almost anyone alive, and she had written the safety protocols that prohibited researchers from working alone in hazardous areas. On the day she disappeared, she left her protective equipment in her vehicle and walked toward a steam vent that emits gases at temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit. She never came back, and her body was never found. But 19 days later, a helicopter pilot saw her standing inside the crater. She was on a ledge approximately 200 feet below the rim. The temperature at that depth exceeded 300 degrees. The sulfur dioxide concentration would cause unconsciousness within seconds. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she disappeared, and she was looking up at the helicopter with an expression the pilot later described as peaceful. She waved at him. Then the pilot circled back for another pass, and the ledge was empty. 4 days after that, a different pilot saw the same figure in the same location. This pilot had a camera. The photographs showed an empty ledge, but the thermal data embedded in the image files showed a cool spot, a shadow of absorbed heat in the exact place where the figure had been standing. Something had been there. Something that existed when human eyes looked at it, but did not register when technology tried to capture it. That case occurred 6 years ago. The woman's body has never been recovered. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing her near the crater since her disappearance, always standing motionless, always in conditions that would kill any human instantly. She is not the only person who has vanished near a volcano and been seen afterward in impossible locations, and she is not the only person whose disappearance left behind evidence that contradicts everything we think we know about how volcanoes kill. Volcanoes occupy a unique position in the landscape of human disappearances. They are among the most dangerous environments on Earth, killing through heat, toxic gas, explosive eruption, and the collapse of unstable ground. When someone enters a volcanic feature and does not return, the assumption is death by natural hazard. The extreme conditions destroy evidence, dissolve remains, and make conventional search operations impossible. Cases close quickly because there is nothing to investigate. The volcano consumed them. End of story. But some cases do not fit this pattern. Some involve people who could not have reached the locations where they were last seen. Some involve physical evidence that contradicts the laws of thermodynamics. Some involve witnesses who saw the missing person days or weeks after their disappearance, standing in the fire, apparently unharmed, apparently aware of being observed. These cases share characteristics with unexplained wilderness disappearances documented in other environments, the same patterns of impossible evidence, trails that end without explanation, equipment found where it should not be. But volcanoes add elements that exist nowhere else on Earth. Heat is the first element. Not ordinary heat, not campfire heat or desert heat, but temperatures that can reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface of a lava flow. Temperatures that can melt steel, that can vaporize water instantly, that can reduce a human body to calcium powder in minutes. This kind of heat does not leave survivors. It does not leave mysteries. It simply destroys everything it touches, except when it does not. Pressure is the second element. The forces beneath a volcano come from miles underground, from magma chambers that contain enough energy to reshape continents. This pressure creates environments that have no equivalent anywhere else on Earth, zones where the normal rules of physics seem to bend, where instruments record data that makes no sense, where witnesses see things that should not be possible. And there is a third element that scientists do not discuss in their papers, but that indigenous peoples around the world have recognized for thousands of years. The Hawaiians call it the realm of Pele, the goddess who lives in Kilauea and claims certain souls for her own. The Sicilians have legends of spirits that dwell in Etna and occasionally take the living. The Mapuche of Chile speak of beings called Pilan that inhabit volcanic mountains and collect humans for purposes that mortals cannot understand. These cultures developed independently on different continents with no contact between them, but they reached remarkably similar conclusions about what volcanoes are and what lives inside them. The scientific community dismisses these beliefs as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena that early humans could not understand. But the evidence in certain volcanic disappearances suggests that dismissal may be premature. Something happens to certain people near volcanoes that cannot be explained by accident or geology or any natural process we currently understand. Something takes them in ways that leave behind witnesses, physical evidence, and questions that have never been answered. This investigation examines cases of people who vanished near volcanoes under circumstances that remain unexplained. Scientists, tourists, rescue workers, park rangers, people who understood the dangers and took every precaution, and people who should never have been in hazardous areas at all. People whose bodies were never found, and people who were seen afterward in conditions that should have killed them instantly. The evidence does not point toward conclusions. The evidence only raises questions about what volcanoes really are, what exists inside them, and what happens to the people who get too close. Subscribe now if you want to understand why researchers who study unexplained disappearances have begun paying attention to volcanic cases. Turn on notifications, because the evidence we are about to present will change how you think about these geological features. The fire does not care whether you believe in it. The fire takes who it takes. And sometimes, according to the witnesses and the data and the patterns that keep emerging, the fire does not let them go. Dr. Catherine Morrison had studied Kilauea for 17 years before she disappeared. She grew up in Portland, Oregon, the daughter of a geology professor at Portland State University, who brought her to Hawaii on a research trip when she was 12 years old. She stood at the edge of the Halemaumau crater and watched the lava lake churn and bubble, and she decided in that moment that she would spend her life studying these forces. She earned her undergraduate degree at the University of Oregon, her doctorate at Caltech, and completed postdoctoral work at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory before accepting a faculty position at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Her specialty was volcanic gas emissions, the invisible chemical compounds that escape from magma as it rises toward the surface. These gases can provide early warning of eruptions, can poison the air for miles around an active vent, can create acid rain that damages crops and buildings and human lungs. Catherine developed instruments that could measure the composition of volcanic gases with unprecedented precision, and her data helped predict eruptions that saved lives in Hawaii, in Indonesia, in Iceland, in Chile. She was considered one of the leading volcanologists of her generation, and she understood the dangers of her work better than almost anyone. She had personally witnessed 3 deaths during her career. The first was a colleague who stepped onto what appeared to be solid rock near a lava tube entrance and fell through a thin crust into superheated gas below. The second was a graduate student who removed his gas mask for 30 seconds to adjust a piece of equipment and inhaled enough sulfur dioxide to destroy his lungs. The third was a photographer who ignored warning signs and approached an active flow that suddenly changed direction. Catherine had written reports on all 3 deaths. She had used them as case studies in her safety training. She had made certain that everyone who worked with her understood that volcanoes killed experts as easily as they killed tourists, that knowledge and experience provided no protection against the fundamental physics of heat and gas and pressure. On October 4, 2018, Catherine drove to the summit area of Kilauea volcano for what her schedule described as a routine gas monitoring survey. She was accompanied by a graduate student named Robert Walsh, who was completing his dissertation under her supervision. They arrived at the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park Research Facility at 7:30 in the morning and signed out for a day of fieldwork at several monitoring stations around the summit caldera. The summit had been transformed by the eruption that had begun in May of that year. The floor of the Halemaumau crater had collapsed, dropping more than 1,500 feet and creating a pit that was still steaming and shifting. The lava lake that had been a tourist attraction for years was gone, replaced by an unstable abyss that rangers monitored constantly for signs of renewed activity. The area was closed to the public, but researchers with proper authorization could still access the monitoring stations that ringed the caldera. Catherine and Robert collected gas samples at 4 stations throughout the morning, following the same route that Catherine had followed hundreds of times over the years. Robert later told investigators that she seemed normal during the morning work, focused and methodical as always, explaining the readings they were collecting and what they indicated about subsurface conditions. They ate lunch at a picnic area near the Jagger Museum, which had been closed to the public since the eruption began. Catherine talked about Robert's dissertation research, about a conference paper she was preparing, about plans for the following semester. Nothing in her conversation suggested anything unusual. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, Catherine told Robert that she wanted to check one more monitoring station before they returned to the research facility. The station was located near the rim of the collapsed Halemaumau crater, in an area that required extra caution due to unstable ground and elevated gas levels. Robert offered to accompany her, as Catherine's own safety protocols required. She said no. She said the station was close to the access road, and she would only be gone for an hour. She said she did not want to put Robert at unnecessary risk. This was unusual. Catherine had written the rule that required researchers to work in pairs in hazardous areas. She enforced that rule strictly with her students and had reprimanded colleagues who violated it. For her to suggest going alone to a monitoring station near an active crater was a departure from everything Robert had observed in 2 years of working with her. He mentioned this to her. She smiled and said she would be fine, that she knew this volcano better than she knew her own apartment, that she would radio when she was heading back. Robert did not argue. He later told investigators that he assumed she had reasons he did not understand, that she knew something about the conditions or the equipment that made a solo trip necessary. He trusted her judgment because she had earned that trust over years of demonstrating caution and expertise. He watched her drive away toward the Halemaumau overlook, and he began packing up the equipment they had used during the morning. Catherine's last radio transmission came at 2:15 that afternoon. She reported that she had reached the monitoring station and was beginning to take readings. Her voice sounded normal. Robert acknowledged the transmission and told her he would meet her at the research facility in about an hour. She said okay and signed off. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. When Catherine had not returned by 3:30, Robert tried to reach her on the radio. There was no response. He tried again at 3:45 and at 4 o'clock. Nothing. At 4:15, he drove to the monitoring station where Catherine had been heading. Her vehicle was parked near the access trail, exactly where he expected it to be. The doors were unlocked. Her safety equipment was inside, including her gas mask, her heat-resistant suit, and her personal locator beacon. She had gone toward the crater without any of the gear that her own protocols required. Robert walked to the monitoring station, a collection of instruments housed in a weatherproof cabinet about 200 yards from the crater rim. The cabinet was closed and locked. The data log showed no new entries since the previous week. Catherine had never taken the readings she had radioed that she was beginning. Robert walked to the crater rim and looked down into the collapsed caldera. Steam rose from dozens of vents in the unstable floor far below. The air smelled of sulfur and hot rock. He called Catherine's name and heard nothing but the hiss of escaping gas and the rumble of the still settling crater. He radioed for help at 4:23. Rangers arrived within 30 minutes, and the search began before sunset. The area around the monitoring station was examined thoroughly that evening, but there was no sign of Catherine. No body, no clothing, no equipment, No indication of what had happened or where she had gone. The search expanded the next day to include helicopter surveys of the crater interior and drone flights into areas too dangerous for humans to enter. Nothing was found. On the second day, a search team discovered Catherine's field notebook. It was lying on a rock approximately 100 feet from the crater rim, in an area that had been searched multiple times the previous day. The notebook had not been there before, or the searchers had somehow missed it despite walking within feet of that exact location. The notebook was open to a page covered in handwriting that matched Catherine's known samples, but looked different from her usual precise script. The letters were irregular. The lines slanted across the page instead of following the faint-ruled lines, and the content made no sense to the investigators who read it. The first sentence said they communicate through the heat. The second sentence said I can hear them now. The third sentence said the opening is at the north vent and I have to go through. The fourth sentence, written in letters so shaky they were barely legible, said I understand why they chose me. Below these sentences was a series of numbers arranged in patterns that did not match any coordinate system or scientific notation the investigators could identify. The page ended with a single word, written larger than the rest, underlined 3 times. The word was home. The notebook was collected as evidence and analyzed by multiple experts. Handwriting analysts confirmed that the writing matched Catherine's known samples, though the deterioration in fine motor control visible in the later sentences was consistent with someone experiencing neurological impairment or extreme emotional distress. Psychologists reviewed Catherine's history and found no indication of mental illness, no previous episodes of delusional thinking, no family history of schizophrenia or other conditions that might explain what she had written. Colleagues who knew her well said the words did not sound like her, that Catherine was rigorously scientific and would never write about hearing things or going through openings. Something had happened to her between her last radio transmission and whenever she wrote those words, something that had changed her thinking or her perception of reality. The north vent that Catherine mentioned in her notebook is a steam vent on the northern edge of the Halemaumau crater. It emits gases at temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause third-degree burns on contact, hot enough to cook human tissue in seconds. The gas composition includes sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide at concentrations that would cause unconsciousness within 2 or 3 breaths. Nothing can survive passage through that vent. Nothing living can approach within 20 feet without protective equipment. Catherine had left her protective equipment in her car. The search continued for 23 days. Helicopters flew patterns over the crater every morning, using thermal cameras to scan for any sign of a body on the accessible surfaces. Drones were sent into the crater itself, into areas too dangerous and too hot for human searchers. Ground teams covered every trail within 5 miles of the monitoring station. Cadaver dogs were brought in, but they showed no interest in any location near the crater, as if there was no scent to follow. On the 19th day of the search, helicopter pilot James Whitfield was conducting a routine survey of the crater interior when he saw a figure on a ledge approximately 200 feet below the rim. James had known Catherine Morrison for 8 years. He had flown her to remote monitoring stations dozens of times. He recognized her face, her build, the way she stood with her weight on her left leg, a posture she had developed after a hiking injury years earlier. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing on the day she disappeared, a tan field shirt and khaki pants and brown hiking boots. She was standing on a narrow ledge of solidified lava, looking up at the helicopter. When James made eye contact with her, she smiled. Then she waved at him. James radioed the sighting immediately, giving the coordinates as precisely as his instruments could measure. He circled the helicopter for another pass, descending as low as he safely could, given the thermal updrafts and toxic gas plumes rising from the crater. By the time he came around for the second look, the ledge was empty. He flew a search pattern over that section of the crater for the next 45 minutes, looking for any sign of where Catherine might have gone. The walls were sheer in most places, with no obvious routes up or down from the ledge where he had seen her. The temperature at that depth was later measured at 340 degrees Fahrenheit. The sulfur dioxide concentration was more than 10 times the lethal threshold. No human being could survive on that ledge for more than a few seconds, and yet James had seen her standing there calmly, looking up at him, waving. The search coordinator did not believe him. The official response was that James had experienced a hallucination caused by heat, fatigue, and the emotional stress of searching for someone he knew personally. He was removed from search duties and required to undergo a psychological evaluation before returning to flight status. The evaluation found nothing wrong with him. He was experienced, mentally stable, and showed no signs of the kind of wishful thinking that might cause someone to imagine seeing a missing friend. He insisted that what he had seen was real, that Catherine Morrison had been standing on that ledge, that she had looked directly at him and waved. 4 days later, pilot Sarah Winters saw the same thing. She was conducting a thermal survey of the crater when she spotted a figure on the same ledge where James had reported his sighting. The figure was female, wearing tan and khaki clothing, standing motionless and looking up at the helicopter. Sarah had a camera mounted in her cockpit, and she managed to trigger it several times before the figure disappeared. The photograph showed the ledge, the steam vents, the fractured lava formations of the crater wall. The photographs showed no figure, but when analysts examined the thermal data embedded in the image files, they found an anomaly in the exact location where Sarah had seen the figure standing. A cool spot in the data, approximately the size and shape of a human being, as if something had been there absorbing heat instead of radiating it. The search was officially suspended on October 27, 2018. Catherine Morrison was declared missing and presumed deceased. Her death was attributed to volcanic hazards at Kilauea, though no body was ever recovered, and no specific cause of death could be determined. The case was closed administratively, but among the researchers and rangers who had known Catherine, questions continued to circulate. What had she meant by the words in her notebook? Why had she left her safety equipment behind? How had 2 experienced pilots seen her standing in conditions that would have killed her instantly? And what had caused the thermal anomaly in Sarah's photographs? The cool shadow in the shape of a person standing where no person could possibly stand. In the 6 years since Catherine Morrison's disappearance, at least 7 people have reported seeing a woman matching her description near the Kilauea summit. Park rangers on patrol, tour helicopter pilots, scientists from the Volcano Observatory. The sightings follow a pattern. The woman is always standing near the crater rim or on a ledge inside the crater itself. She is always motionless, looking toward the volcanic vent. She never responds when people call out to her. She never moves while someone is watching her. But when the observer looks away for a moment and then looks back, she is gone, as if she had never been there at all. One ranger, a man named Michael Reeves, who had worked at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park for more than 20 years, reported an encounter in March of 2021 that disturbed him enough to request a transfer to a park on the mainland. He was conducting an early morning patrol near the monitoring station, where Catherine had last been seen, when he noticed a woman standing about 50 yards away, looking into the crater. He called out to her, identifying himself as a park ranger and asking if she needed assistance. The woman turned and looked at him. Michael told researchers that he recognized her immediately. He had met Catherine Morrison several times during her years of work at Kilauea, and there was no doubt in his mind that the woman standing near the crater was her. But something was wrong with her appearance. Her skin had a grayish cast to it, like ash or volcanic rock. Her eyes caught the early morning light in a way that reminded him of obsidian, the volcanic glass that forms when lava cools rapidly. She looked at him without blinking, without any expression he could read, and then she opened her mouth as if to speak. What came out was not words. Michael described it as a hissing sound, like steam escaping from a vent, but with variations in pitch and rhythm that made it seem almost like language. The sound rose and fell, paused and continued, as if she was trying to communicate something in a medium that human vocal cords were not designed to produce. Michael stood frozen, unable to move or respond, watching this woman who looked like Catherine Morrison, but whose skin was the color of ash and whose voice was the voice of a steam vent. Then she was gone. Michael did not see her walk away or disappear. He blinked, and she was simply not there anymore. He took early retirement 3 months after that encounter. He does not visit Hawaii Volcanoes National Park anymore. He does not discuss what happened to him publicly, but he told researchers that he believes Catherine Morrison found what she was looking for when she walked toward the north vent. He believes she went through whatever opening she had written about in her notebook, and he believes she is still there, somewhere in the heat and pressure of the volcano, transformed into something that can exist in that environment. He said he hopes she found peace. He said he is not certain that peace is what she found. The second case took place 5,000 miles from Hawaii, on the slopes of a volcano that has been watched by humans for more than 3,000 years. Mount Etna rises more than 10,000 feet above the eastern coast of Sicily, the largest and most active volcano in Europe. Greek and Roman writers described it as the forge of Hephaestus, god of fire, and metalwork. Medieval Christians believed its craters were entrances to hell. The indigenous Sicilian peoples who lived on its slopes long before the Greeks arrived had their own stories about what dwelt inside the mountain. Spirits of fire that occasionally emerged to take the living back with them into the depths. Today, Mount Etna is a major tourist destination. Cable cars carry visitors to the upper slopes. Guided hiking tours approach the summit craters. Scientists from around the world study its behavior, trying to predict when the next major eruption will occur and how it will affect the 1 million people who live in its shadow. And people continue to disappear on its slopes in ways that local authorities have never been able to explain. Thomas Brennan was a geology professor from the University of Colorado, who came to Sicily in September of 2020 to conduct research on Etna's summit craters. He was 53 years old, an expert on volcanic stratigraphy, with more than 30 years of field experience on 5 continents. He had climbed Etna 4 times previously, and knew the mountain's hazards as well as any foreign researcher could. He arrived in Catania on September 12th and spent 5 days preparing for his research expedition, hiring local guides, arranging transportation, and checking weather forecasts for the summit. On September 17th, Thomas joined a group of 8 other climbers for a dawn ascent to the summit craters. The group included 6 tourists from various European countries and 2 guides from the town of Nicolosi, where Thomas had hired them. They left the cable car station at 4 in the morning and reached the summit area at approximately 6:30, just as the sun was rising over the Mediterranean. The conditions were excellent: clear skies, calm winds, minimal gas emissions from the active vents. Thomas photographed the Bocca Nuova crater and collected several rock samples while the guides described the geological features to the tourists. At approximately 7:15, one of the tourists noticed that Thomas was no longer with the group. The tourist, a German woman named Anna Richter, had been listening to the guide explain the history of a particular lava flow when she realized that the American professor who had been standing next to her a few minutes earlier was gone. She asked the others if they had seen where he went. No one had. They had all been focused on the guide and the crater, following instructions to watch a particularly active steam vent on the far side of the caldera. The guide searched the immediate area while the tourists stayed together near the crater rim. The summit of Etna is rocky and exposed, with limited places where a person could hide or take shelter. The guides walked in expanding circles, calling Thomas's name, checking behind lava formations and in shallow depressions where someone might have stopped to rest. They found nothing. No sign of where Thomas had gone, no footprints leading away from the group, no equipment left behind. He had simply vanished from an exposed mountaintop while 8 people stood within 50 feet of him. The search expanded over the following days, involving local rescue teams, park rangers, and eventually the Italian military. Helicopters flew patterns over the summit and upper slopes. Drones were sent into the craters themselves. Search dogs were brought up the mountain to look for any scent trail. Nothing was found. Thomas Brennan had disappeared without leaving any physical trace of where he had gone or what had happened to him. One witness provided a detail that the official investigation did not include in its final report. A French tourist named Claire Dubois, who had been standing closest to Thomas when he vanished, told researchers that she had heard something unusual in the seconds before she realized he was gone. She described it as a low humming sound, barely audible, that seemed to come from the crater itself rather than from any specific point on the surface. The sound made her feel disoriented, as if she had lost track of time for a moment, as if a few seconds had been edited out of her experience without her noticing. When the sensation passed, Thomas was gone. The other witnesses did not remember hearing this sound, but several reported similar sensations of disorientation or missing time. One tourist said he felt like he had blinked and lost a few seconds. Another said she had a strange feeling of déjà vu, as if she had already experienced the moment when she realized Thomas was missing. The guides dismissed these reports as the effects of altitude and thin air, but Claire insisted that what she had experienced was different from ordinary lightheadedness. She said it felt like something had briefly interrupted her perception of reality, and when the interruption ended, Thomas Brennan was no longer there. 3 weeks after Thomas disappeared, his sister Margaret received a phone call at her home in Denver. The caller ID showed an unknown number. The voice on the other end was Thomas. Margaret was certain of this. She had spoken to her brother at least once a week for their entire adult lives. She knew his voice, his speech patterns, the way he phrased things. It was him, but the conversation made no sense. Thomas did not identify himself or explain where he was. He did not ask how Margaret was doing or mention any of the normal topics they discussed. He spoke in short, fragmented sentences that seemed disconnected from each other, as if he was having trouble organizing his thoughts, or as if he was trying to communicate something that words were not adequate to express. Margaret recorded part of the call on another device. She later provided the recording to researchers who were investigating unexplained volcanic disappearances. In the recording, Thomas says the fire is not what we thought. He says they live in the pressure, and they have always been there. He says, I can see everything now, every eruption, every death. It is all connected. He says the mountain chose me, and I did not understand, but now I do. Margaret can be heard asking where he is, asking if he is hurt, asking him to please tell her what happened. Thomas does not respond to her questions. He continues speaking as if she has not said anything. He says, do not look for me, because I am where I need to be. He says the heat is not pain, and the heat is transformation. He says I am becoming what I was meant to be. Then the call ends abruptly, without a goodbye, without any indication that Thomas knew the conversation was over. Margaret tried to call the number back. It was not in service. She contacted the phone company and requested records of incoming calls to her number at that time. The records showed no call. According to every technological system designed to track such things, the phone call that Margaret had recorded and listened to multiple times had never happened. Investigators analyzed the recording. Voice recognition software confirmed that the voice matched samples of Thomas Brennan's speech from before his disappearance. The accent, the rhythm, the particular way he pronounced certain words were all consistent with his known vocal patterns. Whatever Margaret had heard, it sounded like her brother. But the words he spoke made no sense, and the call that delivered them should have been impossible. Thomas Brennan has been missing for 4 years. His body has never been found. Margaret has not received any additional calls, despite keeping the same phone number and checking it obsessively for any sign of contact. She visits Mount Etna every year on the anniversary of Thomas's disappearance. She hikes to the summit and stands at the spot where he was last seen. She looks into the craters and waits, hoping that whatever took her brother might let him call again, might let her understand what he was trying to tell her. She says she sometimes hears the humming sound that Claire Dubois described, low and steady, coming from somewhere deep in the mountain, almost below the threshold of human hearing, but present nonetheless. She says when she hears it, she feels like Thomas is close, like he is standing just on the other side of something she cannot see or touch. She says she does not think he wants to come back. She says she thinks he found something in the volcano that was more important to him than anything in the world he left behind, and she is trying to make peace with that. She is trying to accept that her brother is still alive in some form, somewhere in the heat and pressure of Mount Etna, becoming whatever the mountain is making him. The third case comes from South America, from a volcano with one of the only permanent lava lakes on Earth. Villarrica is located in southern Chile, a nearly perfect cone that rises more than 9,000 feet above the surrounding lake district. Its summit crater contains a churning pool of molten rock that glows red at night and sends ash and gas into the atmosphere year-round. It is one of the most active volcanoes in South America and one of the most accessible, attracting thousands of climbers annually who want to look into the lava lake from the crater rim. The climb is not technically difficult by mountaineering standards, but it is dangerous. The weather can change rapidly, bringing whiteout conditions without warning. The altitude affects inexperienced climbers. The crater rim itself is unstable, with sections that can collapse without warning into the superheated pit below. Rescue operations on Villarrica are complicated by the toxic gases that rise from the lava lake, and by the extreme heat that makes it impossible to approach certain areas of the summit. On February 7, 2017, a group of 4 climbers from Buenos Aires was approaching the summit of Villarrica when one of them slipped on loose volcanic ash and slid toward the crater. He fell approximately 40 feet before his ice axe caught on a rock outcropping and stopped his descent. He was injured, but alive, hanging on an unstable slope approximately 30 feet below the crater rim. His companions called for rescue immediately. A helicopter arrived within 2 hours, carrying a team of 3 rescue specialists from CONAF, the Chilean National Forest Corporation, which manages the national park around Villarrica. The rescue operation was straightforward in concept. One specialist would be lowered by rope to reach the injured climber. He would secure the climber in a rescue harness. Both would be lifted to safety by the helicopter. The specialist selected for the descent was a 38-year-old man named David Torres, an American from San Diego who had moved to Chile 15 years earlier and had become one of the most experienced high-altitude rescue specialists in South America. He had performed dozens of extractions from Villarrica and other volcanoes in the region. He understood the risks better than anyone, and he had the technical skills to manage them. David was lowered into the crater at 1:47 in the afternoon. Radio communication confirmed that he reached the injured climber at 1:52. He reported that the man, whose name was Roberto Vega, was conscious and stable despite his injuries. David began attaching the rescue harness, explaining to Roberto what was going to happen and how the extraction would proceed. At 1:58, David's radio transmission became garbled. His voice was obscured by static and what sounded like a low-frequency hum, similar to the sound that witnesses at other volcanic disappearances had described. The surface team could make out only fragments of what he was saying. The words heat and opening and something about seeing were audible, but the context was lost. At 2:02, the rope went slack. The helicopter crew pulled up the rope. The rescue harness was attached to the end, exactly as it should have been, but the harness was empty. David Torres and Roberto Vega were not in it. They were not on the rock outcropping where David had been working. They were not visible anywhere on the crater walls. Both men had vanished from a position suspended on a rope, in full view of witnesses in the helicopter above them. The crew searched every visible surface of the crater for the next 2 hours. The lava lake churned at the bottom, more than 300 feet below where David had been working. Even if both men had somehow fallen, they would have been visible on the slopes between the outcropping and the lake. They were not visible. They were simply gone. The search continued for 4 days, involving additional helicopters, specialized climbing teams, and thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting human body heat from significant distances. Nothing was found. No bodies, no equipment, no indication of what had happened. David Torres and Roberto Vega had disappeared from the inside of an active volcanic crater while multiple witnesses watched. The official investigation concluded that both men had fallen into the lava lake, though no explanation was offered for how this could have happened, given that David was secured to a rope that remained intact and that the lake was more than 300 feet below their position. The case was closed as a double fatality due to volcanic hazards. But the audio from David's final transmissions was preserved, and researchers who have studied unexplained volcanic disappearances have analyzed it extensively. The static that obscured his voice was not ordinary radio interference. It contained patterns that audio engineers described as structured, with regularities that resembled language or organized information. The low-frequency hum audible beneath the static was consistent with descriptions from other volcanic sites around the world. And the fragments of David's words that were audible suggest that something happened to him in those final seconds that changed his understanding of where he was and what was occurring. David's wife Rebecca lived in the town of Pucón at the base of Villarrica. She refused to accept the official explanation for her husband's death. She said David was too experienced to fall, that he had performed more dangerous rescues in worse conditions, that something else had happened to him. 3 months after the disappearance, she hiked to the crater rim at night to look into the lava lake. She has never spoken publicly about what she saw, but she told researchers privately that she saw figures moving on the inner walls of the crater, shapes that appeared to be made of heat and light, that shifted and flickered like flames, but moved with apparent purpose and intention. She said one of the figures stopped and turned toward her, and even though it had no face, she could feel it looking at her, could feel its awareness of her presence. She said she heard David's voice coming from somewhere in the crater, not a recording, not an echo, but his actual voice speaking words she could not understand, in a tone that sounded peaceful, almost happy. She left the crater rim and has never gone back. She moved away from Pucón the following year and no longer discusses her husband or what happened to him. But she told researchers one thing before she stopped talking. She said the figures in the crater were not destroying people. She said they were collecting them. She said she believed David was still in there somewhere, in the heat and the pressure and the glow of the lava, being transformed into something that could exist in that environment. She said she was glad she had not gone closer. She said she was afraid of being collected too. 3 cases from 3 volcanoes on 3 different continents. A scientist who wrote about going through an opening and has been seen standing in impossible conditions for 6 years. A professor who vanished while 8 people stood nearby and later called his sister to talk about transformation and becoming. A rescue specialist who disappeared from a rope in midair while his wife later saw figures made of light moving in the crater where he was lost. These cases share characteristics that researchers have found disturbing. All 3 involved experienced professionals who understood volcanic hazards and took appropriate precautions. All 3 involved witnesses who saw or heard things that should not be possible, sightings of missing persons in lethal conditions, phone calls that no technology recorded, figures in the fire that moved with apparent intelligence. All 3 left behind evidence suggesting that the missing persons did not simply die, that they went somewhere, that they may still exist in some form in the volcanic environments where they were lost. The indigenous peoples who have lived near volcanoes for generations would not find these cases surprising. Their stories describe exactly what the evidence suggests, that volcanoes are not merely geological features, but openings to somewhere else, passages to places where humans can be taken and transformed, dwelling places for beings that have been collecting people for as long as people have existed. Science has no framework for evaluating these beliefs. Science looks at volcanoes and sees chemistry, physics, geology, natural processes that operate according to predictable laws. But the evidence from these cases does not fit the scientific framework. The thermal anomalies, the structured static, the impossible sightings, the phone calls from nowhere. Something is happening at the world's volcanoes that our current understanding cannot explain. Something that takes certain people and does something to them that leaves behind witnesses and questions and evidence that will not resolve into comfortable answers. 3 cases from 3 continents, and all 3 share the same patterns. Experienced professionals who understood volcanic hazards, evidence that contradicts known physics, witnesses who saw the missing persons in conditions that should have been instantly fatal, and suggestions in each case that these people did not simply die, but went somewhere, became something, continued existing in forms that science has no framework to explain. The indigenous peoples who live near volcanoes would not find these cases surprising. The Hawaiians, the Sicilians, the Mapuche of Chile have been telling the same stories for centuries. Openings in the fire, transformations, beings that collect certain humans for purposes the living cannot understand. Science dismisses these stories as mythology. The evidence we have presented suggests the dismissal may be premature. Part 2 examines cases from lava tubes, crater lakes, and active eruption zones. A video that appears to show a man walking through solid rock, belongings arranged on an underwater ledge 30 meters deep, footprints that continued past the point where their owner lay dead. The patterns continue. The questions multiply. Subscribe now and turn on notifications if you want to see where this evidence leads. The video is 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. It was recorded inside a lava tube on the slopes of Mount Fuji and uploaded to a Japanese hiking forum in November of 2021 by an anonymous user who provided no explanation for how they obtained it. The footage shows a man walking through a cave, his headlamp illuminating the black volcanic rock walls, his breath visible in the cold air. He is narrating his exploration in English, describing the geological formations around him, mentioning that he has separated from his tour group to see how far the passage extends into the mountain. At the 2-minute mark, the man stops walking. His headlamp is pointed at the cave wall in front of him, and something is happening to the rock. The surface is moving, rippling like water, like the wall has become liquid and is flowing in slow waves from floor to ceiling. The man does not run. He does not back away or show any sign of fear. He walks toward it, and as he gets closer, he says, "It is beautiful. I can see through it. There is somewhere else on the other side." At the 3-minute mark, the man reaches out and touches the moving wall. His hand does not stop at the surface. His hand goes through, disappearing into the rock up to his wrist, as if he had pushed it into a pool of dark water. He pulls his hand back and looks at it, turning it in the light of his headlamp, examining his fingers as if he is not certain they are still his fingers. He looks at the camera and says it is warm. The other side is warm. And then he says, "I think I am supposed to go through." He turns back to the wall. The rippling has intensified, and there is light visible through the moving rock now, a dim orange glow, like firelight or sunrise, or something else entirely. The man steps forward. The wall flows around him as he walks into it, closing behind him as he passes through. The camera records 37 more seconds of empty cave, the headlamp lying on the ground where he dropped it, the beam illuminating nothing but solid black rock, where a moment earlier there had been an opening to somewhere else. The video ends. The man who recorded it has never been seen again. His name was Daniel Patterson, a 34-year-old software engineer from Seattle, who had traveled to Japan for a 2-week vacation in October of 2021. He arrived in Tokyo on October 27th and spent several days sightseeing before taking a train to the Fuji 5 Lakes region on October 30th. He checked into a small hotel near Lake Saiko and signed up for a guided tour of the Narusawa Ice Cave, one of several lava tubes on the northwestern slope of Mount Fuji that are open to tourists. The tour was scheduled for the morning of October 31st. Daniel joined a group of approximately 20 visitors who followed a guide through the developed portion of the cave, walking on installed pathways past ice formations that persist year-round in the cold volcanic rock. The tour lasted approximately 45 minutes. When the group emerged from the cave, Daniel was not with them. The guide did not notice his absence immediately. The cave is dark. The group was large, and tourists sometimes lag behind to take photographs. It was only when a head count at the exit came up one short that anyone realized Daniel was missing. The guide went back into the cave to look for him, while an assistant kept the rest of the group at the entrance. After 20 minutes of searching the tourist sections, the guide called park authorities. The search that followed was complicated by the nature of the Fuji lava tube system. The developed caves represent only a small fraction of the passages that honeycomb the volcanic rock beneath Mount Fuji. Beyond the tourist areas, the tubes branch and connect in ways that have never been fully mapped. Some passages are blocked by collapsed rock. Others narrow to the point where human passage is impossible. A few extend for miles underground, connecting caves that are kilometers apart on the surface. The potential search area was enormous, and much of it was too dangerous for rescue teams to enter. Searchers found Daniel's backpack on the third day of the search. It was lying in a section of cave that was closed to tourists, approximately half a kilometer from the main tourist route, in a passage that could only be reached by climbing over a barrier and ignoring multiple warning signs. The backpack contained his wallet, his phone, and a notebook filled with handwritten observations about the caves he had visited during his trip. The phone's battery was dead, but when investigators charged it and examined the contents, they found the video. The video had been recorded on the morning of October 31st, starting at approximately 10:15, during the time when Daniel should have been with the tour group in the developed section of the cave. The metadata indicated that the footage was captured in the restricted section where his backpack was found, in a passage that tour guides describe as a dead end, a tunnel that extends approximately 200 meters before terminating at a solid wall of basalt. That wall is the wall visible in the video, the wall that appeared to turn liquid, the wall that Daniel Patterson walked through and never came back from. Part 1 of this investigation examined 3 cases of people who disappeared near active volcanic craters. A scientist in Hawaii, who wrote about going through an opening before she vanished and has been seen standing inside the crater for 6 years. A professor in Sicily who disappeared while 8 people stood nearby and later called his sister to describe his transformation. A rescue specialist in Chile who vanished from a rope in mid-air while his wife later saw figures made of light in the crater where he was lost. Those cases involved active volcanoes, places where heat and gas and molten rock create conditions that kill quickly and destroy evidence completely. The cases in Part 2 are different. They involve volcanic environments that appear dormant or inactive, lava tubes formed by ancient eruptions, lakes filling craters that have not erupted in centuries, mountains that seem to be sleeping. These places do not have the obvious dangers of active craters. They do not kill with heat or gas, but people disappear in them nonetheless, and the evidence left behind suggests that whatever is happening at the world's volcanoes is not limited to the places where fire is visible. The danger may be everywhere the volcanic passages reach. The openings may exist wherever the rock was once molten and has now cooled into hollow spaces beneath the surface. And what waits on the other side may be accessible from any volcanic environment, whether the volcano is actively erupting or has been quiet for 1,000 years. Subscribe now if you watched Part 1 and want to understand how these cases connect to what we examined there. Turn on notifications because the evidence in Part 2 is different from anything we have presented before. We have video footage of a man walking through a solid wall. We have physical objects arranged in patterns that could not have occurred naturally. We have footprints that continue past the point of death. The questions are getting stranger. The answers remain out of reach. Daniel Patterson's video was analyzed by experts in digital forensics, video manipulation, and special effects. None of them could explain how the footage was created if it was not genuine. The video shows continuous recording with no cuts or edits. The wall visibly changes from solid rock to a flowing, liquid surface while the camera remains in motion, an effect that would require sophisticated CGI and compositing work, far beyond what a software engineer with no film production experience could achieve on a smartphone camera. The lighting remains consistent throughout the sequence, with Daniel's headlamp casting shadows that move naturally as he approaches and touches and ultimately walks through the wall. If the video is a fake, It is one of the most technically accomplished fakes ever created, and the person who made it has never come forward to claim credit or explain how it was done. Geologists examined the section of cave where the video was recorded. The wall at the end of the passage is solid basalt, formed approximately 1,200 years ago when lava from Mount Fuji flowed through this area and cooled. Ground-penetrating radar showed no voids behind the wall, no hidden chambers or passages, no spaces where a person could have gone after passing through. The rock is continuous for at least 30 meters beyond the visible surface. Whatever Daniel Patterson walked into, it was not a physical space on the other side of a thin rock layer. Either the video does not show what it appears to show, or Daniel walked into something that exists in the rock itself, some kind of opening that does not obey the normal rules of solid matter. The video was removed from the hiking forum within hours of being posted. The user who uploaded it has never been identified, and attempts to trace the account have led nowhere. Japanese authorities have declined to comment on the footage or on Daniel Patterson's disappearance. His case remains officially open, classified as a missing person with no evidence of foul play, no leads, and no explanation. Daniel's family has viewed the video. His mother could not watch past the point where her son touched the wall. His father watched the entire thing multiple times, trying to understand what he was seeing, trying to find some explanation that made sense. He told researchers that Daniel looked peaceful in the final moments of the footage, that his son did not look like someone walking to his death, that he looked like someone walking towards something he had been looking for. Daniel's internet history, recovered from backups on his home computer in Seattle, showed that he had been researching Fuji's lava tubes for months before his trip. He had read scientific papers about their formation, tourist reviews of the various caves open to visitors, and trip reports from hikers who had explored restricted areas. But he had also searched for something else. He had searched for accounts of strange experiences in the caves, stories of unusual sounds or lights or sensations that visitors had reported. He had found forum posts describing encounters that most readers dismissed as imagination or fabrication, hikers who claimed to have seen walls that seemed to breathe, passages that appeared and disappeared, figures standing in sections of cave that should have been empty. Daniel had saved these posts. He had copied them into documents and highlighted certain passages. He had been looking for exactly what he found. The question is whether he found it or whether it found him. The second case in part 2 comes from Indonesia, from a lake that fills the crater of an ancient volcano on the island of Flores. Mount Kelimutu last erupted in 1968, but it remains one of the most unusual geological features in the world. The summit contains 3 crater lakes, each a different color, and those colors change unpredictably over time. One lake might be turquoise for months and then turn blood red over the course of a few weeks. Another might shift from black to green to pale blue. Scientists attribute these changes to variations in volcanic gas emissions and mineral content, but the local Leo people have their own explanation. They say the lakes are the resting places of souls, that the dead travel to Kelimutu and enter the waters according to how they lived their lives. Young people who die go to one lake. Old people go to another. Those who lived evil lives go to the third, the one that most often turns red. These are beliefs. They are not evidence. But the Leo people also tell stories about the living who enter the lakes, stories about people who wade into the colored water and do not surface, about figures seen moving beneath the surface long after anyone could have survived, about voices that call from the craters at night, speaking names that only certain people can hear. These stories have been told for generations, passed down from a time before the Dutch colonized Indonesia, before Christianity arrived, before anyone outside Flores knew that Kelimutu existed. And there are documented cases that echo what the stories describe. Sarah Mitchell was a marine biologist from San Diego who took a research position at a field station on Flores in January of 2019. She was 29 years old, recently finished with her doctoral work at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, eager to study the coral reef ecosystems of eastern Indonesia before climate change destroyed them. She arrived on Flores with plans to spend 18 months collecting data on reef fish populations, and for the first 2 months, her work proceeded exactly as planned. In March, she visited Mount Kelimutu for the first time. It was a weekend trip, a break from the intensity of fieldwork, a chance to see one of the natural wonders of the island where she was living. She hiked to the summit at dawn and watched the sun rise over the 3 colored lakes. She took photographs and sent them to her family back in California. She wrote in her journal that it was one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. After that visit, something changed. Sarah's colleagues at the research station noticed that she became preoccupied with Kelimutu. She read everything she could find about the crater lakes, scientific papers and folklore and travel blogs and academic studies of Leo religious practices. She asked local people about the legends, recording their stories on her phone, taking notes on details that most visitors would have dismissed as superstition. When colleagues asked why she had become so interested in a volcano, when her work was supposed to focus on coral reefs, Sarah gave vague answers. She said the lakes were fascinating. She said she wanted to understand them better. One colleague, a marine ecologist named James Chen, who had known Sarah since graduate school, noticed something more troubling. He told researchers that Sarah had started talking in her sleep. The walls in the field station dormitory were thin, and he could hear her voice at night, speaking words that sounded like English but did not quite make sense. He could not make out most of what she said, but one phrase came through clearly, repeated on multiple nights with increasing urgency. The phrase was, "They are waiting for me." James asked Sarah about her sleep talking. She said she did not remember her dreams. She seemed uncomfortable with the question, and James let the subject drop. He assumed the stress of fieldwork was affecting her sleep. He assumed it would pass. On April 14, 2019, Sarah told her supervisor that she was taking a personal day to hike at Kelimutu. She left the field station before dawn and drove to the national park entrance, where a ranger remembered her arriving at approximately 6 in the morning. She signed the visitor log, paid the entrance fee, and hiked up the trail toward the summit. Several other visitors saw her on the trail, moving quickly, not stopping to rest or take photographs. One hiker described her as focused, purposeful, like someone who knew exactly where she was going and was eager to get there. The last confirmed sighting of Sarah Mitchell came at approximately 7:45 in the morning. A Dutch couple was standing at the viewpoint overlooking the lake, known as Tiwu Ata Polo, the lake where the Leo people say evil souls go, the lake that most often turns red. Sarah was standing at the railing about 30 feet away from them, looking down at the water. The couple took photographs of the view, and in one of their photos, Sarah is visible at the edge of the frame, her face turned toward the lake, her posture tense with what the photographer later described as anticipation. When the couple left the viewpoint 15 minutes later, Sarah was gone. They did not see her walk away. They did not see her climb over the railing. They assumed she had continued along the trail to view the other lakes. They thought nothing of it until they heard about the search. Sarah Mitchell did not return to the field station that evening. Her supervisor reported her missing the next morning, and park rangers began searching the Kelimutu area. They found her car in the parking lot. They found her signature in the visitor log. They found witnesses who had seen her on the trail and at the viewpoint. But they did not find Sarah. She was not on any of the trails. She was not at any of the viewpoints. She was not anywhere in the developed areas of the park. The search expanded to include the crater lakes themselves, though searching them presented significant challenges. The lakes are acidic, with pH levels that can cause skin burns. The water temperature varies but can reach 40 degrees Celsius near the volcanic vents that feed the craters. Visibility below the surface is limited to a few meters due to the high mineral content. Diving in the lakes is dangerous and rarely attempted. On the 4th day of the search, 2 divers from the Indonesian Search and Rescue Service descended into Tiwu Nua Muri Kufai, the lake where the Leo people say young souls go, the lake that was turquoise on the day Sarah disappeared. They were looking for her body in the shallower sections near the shore, hoping that if she had entered the water, she might have sunk to a depth that was accessible. At approximately 20 meters below the surface, near the limit of safe diving depth given the conditions. One of the divers saw something. He described it in his report as a figure, human-shaped, standing on a ledge or slope of the crater wall, approximately 10 meters deeper than his position. The figure was not floating the way a drowning victim would float. It was not suspended in the water or drifting with the currents. It was standing upright, feet on the bottom, as if the water was not water at all but air. The figure was facing the diver, and although the visibility was too poor to make out features, the diver was certain that it was looking at him. He signaled to his partner. By the time the second diver turned to look, the figure was gone. The divers searched the area where the figure had been standing. They found a ledge of volcanic rock at approximately 30 meters depth, near the limit of how deep they could safely go. They found no body on the ledge. They found no clothing or equipment. But they found 3 objects arranged in a row on the rock surface: a mobile phone, a car key, a watch. The objects were later identified as belonging to Sarah Mitchell. Her family confirmed that the phone case, the key fob design, and the watch were all hers. The objects were not scattered randomly the way items lost in water would be scattered. They were arranged deliberately, the phone placed face up, the key beside it, the watch positioned with its face pointing upward. Someone had put them there with care, with intention. The objects could not have sunk to that position naturally. They could not have been carried by currents to that exact location and arranged in that exact pattern. The only way they could have gotten there was if someone had placed them there. But no human could survive at 30 meters depth in that water without diving equipment, and no diver had entered the lake before the search began. The only person who could have placed those objects on that ledge was Sarah Mitchell herself, which would mean she had descended to 30 meters in acidic, mineral-clouded water, in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes, and had carefully arranged her belongings on an underwater shelf before disappearing into the depths. The investigation concluded that Sarah had entered the lake and drowned, though no explanation was offered for how she had reached the depth where her belongings were found, or why she had arranged them so deliberately. Her body was never recovered. The case was closed as an accidental death, but the diver who saw the figure has never stopped thinking about what he saw. He gave an interview to researchers 2 years after the incident, speaking on condition that his name not be used. He said the figure had been standing too naturally to be a dead body. He said bodies in water do not stand. They float or sink or drift. They do not plant their feet on underwater ledges and turn to face approaching divers. He said the figure had seemed to be watching him, waiting for him to see it. And he said when it disappeared, it did not drift away or sink deeper. It was simply gone, there one moment and not there the next, as if it had stepped through a door he could not see. He said he believed Sarah Mitchell was still in that lake, not dead, not alive in any way he could understand, but present, transformed into something that could exist in the acidic water and the volcanic heat and the pressure of the depths. He said he would never dive at Kelimutu again. He said he was afraid of what he might see the next time, or of what might decide to follow him back to the surface. The Leo people who live near Kelimutu said they were not surprised when they heard what the diver had seen. They said the lakes had taken Sarah because the lakes had wanted her. They said this happens sometimes, that certain people hear voices calling from the water, that certain people are meant to join whatever exists in the volcanic craters. They said looking for her was pointless. They said she was home now. The third case, in part 2, comes from Iceland, from an eruption that should have killed everyone who entered its zone, and apparently did, except that the evidence suggests otherwise. The Holuhraun eruption began on August 31st, 2014, when a fissure opened in the remote highlands of central Iceland. Over the following 6 months, lava poured from the fissure at rates that sometimes exceeded 500 cubic meters per second, eventually covering more than 85 square kilometers of highland terrain. It was the largest volcanic eruption in Iceland in more than 200 years, and authorities closed the area to everyone except scientists and emergency personnel. Despite the closure, people found ways in. Some were photographers who wanted to capture images of the eruption. Some were adventure seekers drawn by the spectacle of molten rock. And some, according to investigators who examined their behavior afterward, came for reasons they could not fully explain, even to themselves. William Hayes was an accountant from Chicago who had never shown any particular interest in volcanoes or Iceland before the summer of 2014. He was 47 years old, married, father of 2 teenagers, partner at a mid-sized accounting firm. His life was stable and predictable, his vacations typically involving beach resorts or visits to family. Nothing in his history suggested he would become obsessed with a volcanic eruption happening 5,000 miles away. But something changed when Holuron began. William started following news coverage of the eruption compulsively, reading every article, watching every video, studying maps of the eruption zone for hours at a time. His wife later told investigators that he would wake in the middle of the night and go to his computer to check for updates, to see if the lava had advanced, to look at new photographs of the fissure. When she asked why he had become so interested, he could not give her a clear answer. He said he felt like he needed to see it. He said he felt like something was waiting for him there. On September 10th, 2014, William told his wife he was going on a business trip to New York. Instead, he flew to Reykjavik. He rented a vehicle capable of handling Iceland's highland roads. He purchased supplies and cold weather gear. He told no one where he was really going. On September 15th, rangers patrolling the perimeter of the closed zone around Holuron found William's vehicle abandoned on a track approximately 8 kilometers from the active fissure. The engine was cold. The supplies he had purchased were still inside. His wallet and passport were in the glove compartment. He had left everything behind and walked toward the eruption. Rangers found his footprints in the volcanic ash. The prints led in a straight line toward the fissure, toward the lava, toward the glow that was visible on the horizon, even in daylight. They followed the prints for approximately 3 kilometers until the heat became too intense to continue safely. The ground temperature exceeded what their equipment could handle. The air was thick with sulfur dioxide. Continuing would have been suicide, but William's footprints continued. They could see the prints extending into the heat haze, getting closer and closer to the active eruption, walking into an environment that would kill a human being in seconds. Helicopters searched the eruption zone the next day, using thermal cameras to scan for any sign of William Hayes. They found his body approximately 2 kilometers from the active fissure, lying face down in a field of cooling lava. His clothing had burned. His skin was blackened by heat exposure. He had walked more than 7 kilometers toward the eruption before his body finally failed. The medical examiner determined that William had died of thermal injuries and smoke inhalation. His death was ruled accidental, a case of a tourist who had ignored warnings and paid the ultimate price. The case should have been closed there, but the rangers who found the body had documented something that the official report did not fully address. They had photographed William's footprints throughout the area, creating a record of his path from his vehicle to the eruption zone. And when they reviewed those photographs, they found something that made no sense. William's footprints did not end where his body was found. They continued past the body, toward the fissure, for at least another kilometer beyond the location of his corpse. The man had somehow left footprints that extended past the point of his own death. Investigators attempted to explain this discrepancy. Perhaps the body had been moved by volcanic gases or minor explosions after death. Perhaps the footprints beyond the body belonged to someone else. Perhaps the rangers had made an error in their documentation. None of these explanations fit the evidence. The body showed no signs of having been moved after death. The footprints matched William's boots exactly, with the same wear patterns and the same stride length visible throughout the entire trail. Multiple rangers had seen and photographed the prints extending beyond where the body lay. The documentation was thorough and consistent. William Hayes had left footprints that continued walking toward the eruption after his physical body had stopped moving. The case was classified by Icelandic authorities. The footprint documentation was not released to the public. The official report made no mention of the anomaly, stating only that William had died while illegally entering the eruption zone. but one of the rangers who found the body agreed to speak with researchers about what he saw. His name is Kristján Sigurdsson, and he has worked in the Icelandic highlands for more than 25 years. He has seen volcanic eruptions, glacial floods, blizzards that killed experienced hikers. He thought he understood how people die in Iceland's wilderness. After the Hayes case, he was no longer certain he understood anything. He told researchers that the footprints beyond the body were clear and distinct. They were not smeared or partial. They were not the marks of someone crawling or falling. They were the footprints of someone walking upright, at a steady pace, directly toward the eruption. And they continued until they reached a point where the heat and the lava made it impossible for rangers to follow, even from the air. Kristján said he believed that if he could have followed those footprints all the way to the fissure, they would have walked directly into the molten rock. They would not have stopped at the edge. They would have continued into the lava itself, into the heat, into whatever exists at the heart of an eruption. He said he believed something had kept walking after William Hayes died. He said he believed that whatever was driving William toward the eruption did not stop when his body failed. It just kept going, using his form until it could not use it anymore, and then continuing on its own toward the fire. He said he does not know what William Hayes found at Holuhraun. He said he does not know if the thing that walked past the body was still William in some sense, or if it was something else entirely. He said he tries not to think about it, because when he thinks about it, he starts wondering what is really inside people when they walk toward volcanoes. What is really calling them? What is really waiting? He said he is afraid the answers would be worse than not knowing. 3 cases from 3 volcanic environments that should have been safer than active craters. A lava tube on Mount Fuji, where a man walked through a solid wall. A crater lake in Indonesia, where a woman's belongings were arranged on an underwater ledge 30 meters deep. An eruption zone in Iceland where footprints continued past a dead body. The patterns from Part 1 continue and expand in these cases. People who are drawn to volcanic environments for reasons they cannot fully explain. Physical evidence that defies the laws of physics. Witnesses who saw things that should be impossible. And suggestions in each case that the people who disappeared did not simply die, but went somewhere, became something, continued in some form beyond the point where their physical bodies stopped functioning. The video from Mount Fuji suggests that the boundaries inside volcanic rock may not be permanent, that walls can become permeable, that passages can open to places that do not show up on geological surveys or ground-penetrating radar. Daniel Patterson touched a solid basalt wall and his hand went through it. He walked into that wall and the wall closed behind him. Whatever is on the other side, he is still there. The belongings in Kelimutu suggest that the people who enter volcanic waters do not simply drown. Sarah Mitchell descended to a depth that would have killed her in minutes and took the time to arrange her possessions carefully on an underwater ledge. The diver who found those possessions saw her standing in the water weeks after she disappeared, transformed into something that could exist in conditions fatal to normal humans. The footprints at Holuhraun suggest that death may not end the journey toward volcanic fire. Something continued walking after William Hayes died. Something used his feet to make impressions in the ash beyond the point where his heart stopped and his lungs failed. Something kept moving toward the eruption even after the body could not move anymore. What are these people becoming? Where are they going? What is calling them? And what does it want? The indigenous peoples who live near volcanoes have answers to these questions. They speak of spirits in the fire, of passages to other realms, of transformations that change human beings into something that can exist in conditions that would destroy ordinary flesh. These stories come from cultures that had no contact with each other, from Hawaii and Sicily and Chile and Indonesia and Iceland and dozens of other volcanic regions around the world. They cannot all be correct in their details, but they all point toward the same fundamental claim, that volcanoes are not merely geological features, that they contain something alive and aware, and that something has been taking humans for as long as humans have existed. Science cannot evaluate these claims. Science looks at volcanoes and sees chemistry and physics. natural processes that operate according to predictable laws. But the evidence from these cases does not fit scientific frameworks. The video, the arranged belongings, the continuing footprints. These are not things that chemistry and physics can explain. These are things that suggest the indigenous stories may be pointing towards something real, something that exists in volcanic environments and interacts with humans in ways that leave behind physical evidence and unanswerable questions. The cases in Part 2 expand the patterns we identified in Part 1. Daniel Patterson's video suggests that volcanic rock can become permeable under certain conditions, that passages can open where geological surveys show only solid basalt. Sarah Mitchell's belongings suggest that the people who enter volcanic waters do not simply drown, but descend deliberately, arranging their possessions before disappearing into depths that should kill them. William Hayes's footprints suggest that death may not end the journey toward volcanic fire, that something continues moving even after the body has stopped. These cases occurred in lava tubes, crater lakes, and eruption zones, not active craters with visible lava, but dormant volcanic environments that should have been safer. The evidence suggests that whatever is happening at the world's volcanoes is not limited to places where fire is visible. The openings may exist wherever volcanic rock has formed passages beneath the surface. Part 3 examines the most disturbing cases we have found. A scientist who emerged from a lava tube speaking a language that does not exist on Earth. A man photographed standing inside an active crater 3 years after he walked into it. A research team that found a chamber full of human remains at the bottom of a volcanic vent and has refused to describe what they saw. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The final evidence is the strangest, and the questions it raises may be unanswerable. The neurologist could not explain what he was hearing. Dr. Rebecca Thornton had been unconscious for 11 days following an incident in a Hawaiian lava tube. And when she finally opened her eyes in the intensive care unit at Hilo Medical Center, the first sounds that came out of her mouth were not English. They were not any language the medical staff recognized. The sounds had structure, rhythm, patterns that repeated and varied in ways that suggested grammar and vocabulary, but they matched nothing in any linguistic database the hospital could access. Rebecca spoke for approximately 4 minutes in this unknown language before she stopped, looked around the room at the doctors and nurses staring at her, and said in perfect English that she was back. She could not remember the 11 days she had been unconscious. She could not remember what she had been saying when she woke up. She could not explain what had happened to her in the lava tube that had left her unresponsive for nearly 2 weeks, while her brain showed activity patterns that neurologists had never seen before. But something had changed in her, something fundamental, because in the months and years that followed, the unknown language kept coming back. It would emerge without warning, interrupting her mid-sentence, taking over her voice for seconds or minutes at a time, before releasing her back to English and normal consciousness. She had no control over when it happened. She had no memory of what she said during the episodes. She only knew that something had put a language in her head that did not exist anywhere on Earth, and that language was still trying to communicate through her. Rebecca Thornton was a geophysicist from Stanford University, 51 years old at the time of her experience in March of 2016. She had spent 23 years studying subsurface volcanic activity, developing instruments that could detect magma movement miles beneath the surface, publishing papers that had changed how volcanologists understood eruption prediction. She had explored lava tubes on 4 continents. She understood their dangers and their characteristics better than almost anyone in her field. When she entered the Kazumura cave system on the Big Island of Hawaii on March 7th, she was conducting routine research with 3 colleagues, following safety protocols she had helped develop, doing work she had done hundreds of times before. The Kazumura cave is the longest lava tube in the world, extending more than 40 miles beneath the surface of Kilauea's eastern flank. It was formed approximately 500 years ago, when lava flowed from Kilauea toward the ocean, the outer layer cooling into solid rock while molten material continued to flow beneath. When the eruption ended, the liquid rock drained away, leaving a hollow tube that winds through the volcanic landscape like a buried river. Parts of the cave are accessible to tourists through guided tours. Other parts are restricted to researchers. Much of the system has never been explored at all. Rebecca and her team entered the cave at approximately 9:15 in the morning through a research access point near the town of Pahoa. They were collecting data on subsurface temperature gradients, placing sensors at various points along the tube to track how heat from the still active volcanic system beneath Kilauea moved through the surrounding rock. The work was routine, the conditions were stable, and the team had explored this section of the cave multiple times in previous years. At approximately 11:30, in a section of the tube approximately 2 kilometers from the entrance, Rebecca told her colleagues she needed to rest. She had been complaining of a headache for the past hour, which she attributed to the low oxygen levels common in deep lava tubes. She sat down against the cave wall, closed her eyes, and said she just needed a few minutes. When her colleagues tried to wake her 4 minutes later, she did not respond. Her eyes were open. Her breathing was steady. Her pulse was normal. But she did not react to voices calling her name, to hands shaking her shoulders, to lights shone directly in her face. She was conscious in some medical sense, her brain showing activity on the portable monitors the team carried, but she was unreachable by any means her colleagues attempted. Whatever was happening inside her head, she was not present in the cave with them anymore. The evacuation took more than 3 hours. Rebecca had to be carried on an improvised stretcher through narrow passages and over rough terrain, her colleagues taking turns bearing her weight while trying not to jostle her in case she had suffered some kind of spinal injury. Throughout the journey, her condition did not change. Eyes open, breathing steady, completely unresponsive to all stimuli. When they finally reached the surface and the waiting ambulance, the paramedics had never seen anything like her presentation. She was not in a coma. She was not seizing. She was simply somewhere else, her body present but her mind unreachable. At Hilo Medical Center, doctors ran every test they could think of. MRI scans showed no stroke, no tumor, no bleeding, no structural abnormality that could explain her condition. Toxicology screens came back negative. There was no evidence of volcanic gas poisoning, no indication that she had inhaled anything harmful in the cave. Her vital signs remained stable throughout her hospitalization. She breathed on her own. Her heart beat normally. She simply would not wake up. The only unusual finding was in her brain activity. The EEG patterns that the monitors recorded were unlike anything the neurologists had seen in their careers. Normal brain activity follows recognizable patterns depending on whether a person is awake, asleep, dreaming, or unconscious. Rebecca's patterns fit none of these categories. The activity was intense and organized, suggesting that her brain was processing something, but the organization did not match any known state of consciousness. One neurologist described it as looking like she was having a conversation, with periods of activity followed by pauses followed by different activity, as if her brain was listening and then responding to something the monitors could not detect. For 11 days, Rebecca remained in this state. Her husband flew in from California. Her colleagues visited daily. Doctors consulted with specialists around the country, none of whom could offer an explanation or a prognosis. They did not know if she would ever wake up. They did not know what was happening inside her head. They could only wait and monitor and hope. On March 18th, at 3:20 in the morning, a night nurse heard sounds coming from Rebecca's room. The nurse described the sounds as rhythmic, almost musical, like someone reciting poetry or singing in a language she had never heard. She entered the room and found Rebecca sitting upright in bed, her eyes focused on something the nurse could not see, her mouth moving rapidly as she produced sounds that were clearly language, but clearly not any language the nurse recognized. The nurse called for assistance. By the time doctors arrived, Rebecca had stopped speaking the unknown language. She looked at them with clear, conscious eyes and said simply that she was back. She asked how long she had been gone. When they told her 11 days, she showed no surprise. She said it had felt longer than that. She said it had felt like a very long time. Rebecca could not explain what had happened to her. She had no memory of the 11 days she had been unconscious, no recall of what she had been saying when she woke, no idea where the unknown language had come from. She remembered entering the cave, remembered starting to feel unwell, remembered sitting down to rest. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in a hospital bed with doctors staring at her. Everything in between was blank. But the language was not blank. The language was still there, somewhere in her brain, and it began emerging in the weeks and months that followed her recovery. Without warning, in the middle of conversations or lectures or meals, Rebecca would stop speaking English and begin producing the same sounds the nurse had heard on the night she woke up. The episodes lasted anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes. She had no control over when they occurred. She had no memory afterward of what she had said. She could only wait for the language to release her and hope that it had not happened at an inopportune moment. Linguists analyzed recordings of Rebecca's episodes extensively. They found consistent phonetic patterns, recurring sound combinations that appeared to function as words, grammatical structures that governed how those words were arranged. The language had rules. It had vocabulary. It appeared to be a genuine linguistic system, not the random vocalization sometimes associated with neurological damage or religious ecstasy. But it matched nothing in any database of human languages, living or dead, natural or constructed. Whatever Rebecca was speaking, it had not originated on Earth as far as any expert could determine. 8 years have passed since Rebecca's experience in the Kazumura cave. She still has episodes several times per week. She has learned to manage them, excusing herself from meetings when she feels one coming on, warning new acquaintances about her condition. She has continued her research, returning to lava tubes within a year of her recovery, because she said she needed to understand what had happened to her. She has not had another episode of unconsciousness, but she has reported experiences in volcanic environments that trouble her, sensations of being watched, sounds at the edge of hearing, moments when the cave walls seem to pulse as if something is moving through the rock itself. She believes something communicated with her during those 11 days, something that exists in the volcanic passages beneath Kilauea, something that has intelligence and language and purposes she cannot comprehend. She believes that something gave her a piece of itself, a fragment of how it communicates, and sent her back to the surface, carrying that fragment in her brain. She does not know what the language means. She does not know what she says during her episodes. She does not know if the messages are meant for her or for someone else, or for no one at all. She only knows that the language is real, that it came from somewhere, and that wherever it came from is somewhere inside the volcanic rock, where she lost 11 days of her life. Parts 1 and 2 of this investigation examined cases of people who disappeared near volcanoes and were never found, or who were seen afterward in conditions that should have killed them instantly. Catherine Morrison in Hawaii, seen waving from inside a crater. Thomas Brennan in Sicily, calling his sister to describe his transformation. Daniel Patterson in Japan, walking through a solid cave wall. Sarah Mitchell in Indonesia, standing upright on an underwater ledge weeks after she vanished. William Hayes in Iceland, leaving footprints that continued past his own death. Those cases asked what happens to people who enter volcanic environments and do not return. Part 3 asks a different question. What happens to the ones who come back? Rebecca Thornton came back. She spent 11 days somewhere else, somewhere that gave her a language that does not exist on Earth, and then she returned to her body in a hospital bed in Hilo. She is not the same person she was before. Something is inside her now, something that speaks through her in moments she cannot control, something that connects her to whatever exists in the lava tubes beneath Kilauea. She is not the only one who has returned from a volcanic encounter changed in ways that cannot be explained. Subscribe now if you have followed this investigation from the beginning. Turn on notifications because the cases in Part 3 are the most difficult to dismiss and the most disturbing to consider. We have a scientist speaking an impossible language. We have photographs that should not exist. We have testimony from researchers who found something in a volcanic vent that they refuse to describe. The evidence does not point toward comfortable conclusions. The evidence points toward questions that may never be answered. The second case in Part 3 involves a man who walked into an active volcanic crater and has been photographed standing inside it 3 years later. Mount Yasur is located on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu, a volcanic cone that has been erupting continuously for at least 800 years. The crater contains a churning lake of molten rock that explodes every few minutes, sending lava bombs into the air and lighting the night sky with a red glow visible for miles. It is one of the most accessible active volcanoes in the world, attracting tourists who want to stand at the rim and look directly into an eruption. The local people of Tanna have watched Yasur for generations, and they have stories about what lives in the fire. Stories about people who walked into the crater and did not die. Stories about transformations that turn human beings into something that can exist in the heat. Michael Sullivan was a 31-year-old financial analyst from Boston who visited Vanuatu in June of 2019. He was on a 6-month sabbatical from his job, traveling through the South Pacific, posting photographs on social media of beaches and temples and volcanic landscapes. He arrived on Tanna on June 14th and signed up for an evening tour of Mount Yasur, one of the standard tourist experiences on the island. The tour group assembled at the base of the volcano at approximately 5 in the afternoon. They drove up the access road in 4-wheel drive vehicles, hiked the final stretch to the crater rim, and arrived in time to watch the sun set, while the eruptions began to glow red in the fading light. Michael took dozens of photographs, posting several to his social media accounts with captions about how incredible the experience was. The last photograph he posted showed the erupting vent at dusk, the lava visible as a bright orange pool at the bottom of the crater. The caption read, "Amazing does not begin to describe this." What happened next was witnessed by multiple members of the tour group, though their accounts vary in certain details. At approximately 7:30, as darkness was falling and the group was preparing to leave the crater rim, Michael walked away from the main viewing area toward a section of the rim that was marked as off-limits due to unstable ground. A guide called after him, warning him to stop, but Michael did not respond. He kept walking, climbing over the barrier that marked the restricted zone, moving toward the crater edge. The guide followed him, shouting warnings about the danger. Other tourists watched as Michael reached the edge of the crater and stood there for a moment, looking down into the erupting vent. The guide was approximately 30 feet behind him when Michael stepped forward and disappeared over the rim. The guide reached the edge seconds later and looked down into the crater. He expected to see Michael's body falling toward the lava lake, expected to witness the horrible moment of impact. Instead, he saw nothing. Michael was not visible on the crater walls. He was not falling. He was simply gone, as if he had stepped through a door rather than off a cliff. The search that followed was limited by the impossibility of entering the crater. Rescue teams observed from the rim and deployed drones to scan the interior walls, but they found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of where Michael Sullivan had gone. The local authorities concluded that he had fallen into the lava lake and been consumed, though the guide who had witnessed his disappearance insisted that this was not what he had seen. He said Michael had not fallen. He said Michael had walked into something, had passed through something, had gone somewhere that was not down. Michael Sullivan was declared dead in absentia after the standard waiting period. His family held a memorial service in Boston. His social media accounts were memorialized. His story seemed to be over. 3 years later, in August of 2022, a tour group visiting Mount Yasur at night took photographs of the erupting crater. One of those photographs, taken by a Canadian tourist named Jennifer Walsh, showed something that should not have been there. On a ledge inside the crater, approximately 50 meters below the rim, a figure was visible. The figure was standing upright, facing the camera, illuminated by the glow of the lava below. The image was not perfectly clear due to the distance and the heat distortion, but the figure was recognizably human, male, wearing shorts and a light-colored shirt. standing in a location where the temperature would exceed 200 degrees and the air would be toxic with volcanic gases. Jennifer did not notice the figure until she reviewed her photographs the next day. When she saw it, she reported it to the tour company, who contacted local authorities. The photograph was examined by multiple experts, including investigators who had worked on Michael Sullivan's case 3 years earlier. Facial recognition analysis compared the figure in the photograph to known images of Michael Sullivan from before his disappearance. The analysis could not reach a definitive conclusion due to image quality, but the height, build, and what was visible of the facial structure were consistent with Michael's appearance. The clothing matched what witnesses remembered him wearing on the night he disappeared. The posture, the way the figure was standing with his hands at his sides, matched descriptions of how Michael had stood at the crater rim before he stepped over. The man in the photograph appeared to be Michael Sullivan, standing inside an active volcanic crater 3 years after he walked into it. A new search was organized, using drones capable of withstanding the heat and gas emissions of the crater interior. The drones scanned the ledge where the figure had been photographed and found nothing. The ledge was empty. No human remains, no clothing, no indication that anyone had ever stood there. Since that photograph was taken, there have been at least 5 additional reports of a figure visible inside the Mount Yasur crater. Some are photographs taken by tourists, showing a human shape on ledges or slopes inside the eruption zone. Some are eyewitness accounts from guides and visitors who saw someone standing in the crater and then looked again and saw nothing. The figure is not always in the same location. It appears in different parts of the crater, at different depths, always in conditions that would kill a normal human instantly. Michael Sullivan's family was shown the original photograph. His mother said she recognized her son. She said she knew it was impossible, knew that no one could survive inside an active volcanic crater for 3 years, but she was certain the figure in the photograph was Michael. She asked if anything could be done to rescue him. Authorities told her that even if someone was alive on that ledge, which they did not believe was possible, there was no way to reach them. No helicopter could descend into the crater. No climber could survive the heat and gas. If Michael was there, he was beyond any rescue they could attempt. His mother asked if he was suffering. No one could answer that question. No one knew what was happening to the figure in the photographs, or what the figure even was. A ghost, a hallucination, a man who had been transformed into something that could exist in conditions that would destroy any normal human body. The possibilities were all impossible, and one of them had to be true. The people of Tana say they are not surprised by the photographs. They say Mount Yasur takes people sometimes, and the people it takes do not die. They say the volcano transforms them, gives them new bodies that can withstand the heat, makes them into something that can live in the fire. They say Michael Sullivan is not trapped in the crater. They say he is home. They say he is becoming what the volcano wants him to become, and when that transformation is complete, he will either emerge as something new or remain in the fire forever. They say this has happened before. They say there are many people in Mount Yasur, people who walked in over the centuries and were never seen again by the outside world. They say the volcano is full of them, transformed, waiting, existing in a state that humans cannot understand and should not try to understand. They say looking for Michael Sullivan is pointless. They say he is exactly where he is supposed to be. The third case, in Part 3, is the one that researchers find most difficult to discuss. It involves a scientific expedition into a volcanic vent in Russia, an expedition that found something at the bottom that the team members have refused to describe in any public forum. The Mutnovsky volcano is located on the Kamchatka Peninsula in far eastern Russia, one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth. The volcano has multiple craters and active vents, with fumaroles that emit steam and gas at temperatures exceeding 300 degrees. Scientists study Mutnovsky regularly, collecting samples and data that help them understand how volcanic systems work. It is considered relatively accessible by the standards of active volcanoes, and research expeditions descend into its vents several times per year. In July of 2012, a team of 6 geologists from the Russian Academy of Sciences conducted an expedition into one of Mutnovsky's active vents. The vent was approximately 120 meters deep, narrowing from a diameter of roughly 50 meters at the surface to approximately 15 meters at the bottom. The expedition's purpose was to collect gas samples and temperature data from the deepest accessible point, research that would contribute to understanding of the volcanic system's current state. The team used specialized equipment and protective suits designed for volcanic environments. They descended on ropes, with surface teams monitoring their progress via radio communication that became increasingly difficult as they went deeper. The heat increased as they descended. The gas concentrations rose. The walls of the vent narrowed around them. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, the team reached the bottom of the vent. The surface monitors received a transmission indicating that they had arrived safely and were beginning to collect samples. Communication was poor, broken by static and interference, but the team seemed to be proceeding normally. At 2:47, the surface monitors received a transmission they could not fully understand. The static was worse than it had been, and the team leader's voice was partially obscured. But certain words came through clearly. There is a chamber. There are objects. There are remains. The surface team requested clarification. They received only static in response. For the next 37 minutes, no communication was possible. The surface team waited, growing increasingly concerned, debating whether to send a rescue team down or wait for the expedition to ascend on their own. At 3:24, communication resumed. The team leader, a senior geologist named Dr. Viktor Kozlov, transmitted a single sentence. He said, "We are coming up and do not ask what we found." The ascent took 5 hours. When the team reached the surface, they were visibly shaken. Several team members were crying. One refused to speak for the remainder of the day and required sedation that night to sleep. The team's protective suits were intact. Their equipment was undamaged. They had not been physically harmed in any way. But something had happened to them at the bottom of that vent, something they had seen or encountered that had affected them profoundly. Dr. Kozlov filed a report with the expedition supervisors. The report was classified immediately. It has never been released to the public, and researchers who have requested access have been denied without explanation. The contents of that report remain known only to a small number of Russian government officials and the team members themselves. But fragments of what the team found have emerged over the years, through interviews with team members who spoke off the record, through leaked documents that circulated briefly before being removed from the internet, through statements made to researchers who agreed to protect their sources. The picture that emerges from these fragments is incomplete, but deeply disturbing. According to these sources, the team found a chamber at the bottom of the vent that should not have existed. Geological surveys conducted before the expedition had shown solid rock at that depth. The vent should have terminated in a floor of volcanic material, not an open space. But there was a chamber, approximately 20 meters across, with walls that were smooth and regular in a way that natural volcanic formations never are. The walls looked polished, one source said. They looked like they had been made. In the chamber were objects. The sources are vague about what these objects looked like, either because the team members refused to describe them in detail, or because the descriptions were too strange to convey clearly. One source said the objects were arranged in patterns, geometric shapes that repeated across the floor and walls of the chamber. Another said the objects appeared to be made of something that wasn't quite stone and not quite metal, something that reflected light in unusual ways. A third source said simply that the objects were wrong, that looking at them caused a physical sensation of discomfort, that they seemed to exist in a way that human perception was not designed to process. And there were remains, human remains, bones. The sources disagree on how many sets of remains were present in the chamber. Some say more than a dozen. Some say dozens. Some say the bones covered much of the chamber floor, arranged in circles and rows and patterns that matched the arrangement of the objects around them. Some of the bones were old, centuries old, perhaps millennia, but some were recent. Some had tissue still attached. Some wore fragments of clothing that could be dated to the 20th century. The bones were not scattered randomly, the way remains in a natural environment would be scattered. They were arranged deliberately, positioned with care, organized according to some system that the team could not understand. One source said it looked like a collection. Another said it looked like a library. A third said it looked like something had been sorting humans the way humans sort specimens. The team spent less than 10 minutes in the chamber before beginning their ascent. They collected no samples. They took no photographs that have ever been released. They simply looked at what was there, understood that they were seeing something that should not exist, and left as quickly as they could. Dr. Kozlov has never spoken publicly about what his team found. He published a paper in 2014 that discussed volcanic vent formations in general terms and made no mention of the chamber or its contents. But the paper contained one sentence that researchers who study unexplained phenomena have found significant. The sentence said there are phenomena in volcanic environments that our current scientific frameworks are not equipped to explain or acknowledge. When colleagues asked him to elaborate on this sentence, Dr. Kozlov refused. He said the paper spoke for itself. He said some questions should not be pursued. He retired from fieldwork in 2016 and now teaches at a university in Moscow. He does not discuss the Mutnovsky expedition, but according to one source who visited his office several years after the expedition, Dr. Kozlov keeps a photograph on his desk. The photograph shows a section of polished wall with something carved or embedded in its surface. Symbols, shapes, a pattern that might be writing, but is not any writing system the source recognized. When Dr. Kozlov noticed the visitor looking at the photograph, he turned it face down and said, "That is what was waiting. That is what has always been waiting. And it is still there. What is in the chamber beneath Mutnovsky? Who made it? How long has it been there? Whose bones are arranged on its floor? What are the objects? And what is their purpose? What do the symbols mean? And why has the Russian government classified all information about what the team found?" This investigation documented 9 cases across 8 volcanoes on 5 continents. Catherine Morrison, seen waving from inside Kilauea 6 years after she disappeared. Thomas Brennan, who called his sister from Mount Etna to describe his transformation. David Torres and Roberto Vega, who vanished from a rescue rope inside Villarica. Daniel Patterson, recorded walking through a solid wall in a Fuji lava tube. Sarah Mitchell, whose belongings were found arranged on an underwater ledge at Kelimutu. William Hayes, whose footprints continued past his own corpse at Holuron. Rebecca Thornton, who emerged from Kazumura Cave speaking a language that does not exist. Michael Sullivan, photographed standing inside Mount Yasur 3 years after he stepped into it. And the Mutnovsky team, who found a chamber that should not exist and have never described what was inside. The patterns across these cases are consistent. People drawn to volcanic environments for reasons they cannot fully explain. Physical evidence that defies known science. Witnesses who saw the missing persons in conditions that would kill any normal human. Remains and objects arranged in patterns that suggest collection rather than accident. And in every case, the suggestion that these people did not simply die, but went somewhere, were taken by something, were transformed into something that can exist in the heat and pressure of volcanic environments. The indigenous peoples who live near volcanoes have been describing exactly these patterns for thousands of years. The Hawaiians with Pele, the people of Tana with their transformation legends, the cultures around the world that independently concluded that volcanoes contain something alive, something aware, something that takes certain humans for purposes the living cannot understand. Science has dismissed these beliefs as mythology. The evidence we have documented suggests the mythology may have been pointing toward something real. We cannot explain what is in the chamber beneath Mutnovsky. We cannot explain what language Rebecca Thornton speaks or who taught it to her. We cannot explain how Michael Sullivan has survived 3 years inside an active crater. We cannot explain why William Hayes kept walking after his heart stopped. The evidence exists. The explanations do not. If you have experienced something near a volcano that you cannot explain, if you have felt watched or heard sounds at the edge of hearing, or felt drawn toward the heat in ways that made no sense, you are not alone. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share what you experienced. The evidence continues to accumulate, and every new account adds to the pattern we have documented. Subscribe if you want to see what we investigate next. Turn on notifications. The volcanoes are one category of unexplained disappearances. There are others waiting to be examined.